Thank you very much. Well, welcome to the Standards Committee meeting, and I think we have some apologies for the meeting in the first place, do we not, Robert?
Yes, we do. I think we have Councillor Fowler, Councillor Griffin, and we have also apologies from, sorry, Emma, show who else we have the apologies from?
Sorry, I was on mute. It's Mohammed Khan.
Mohammed Khan.
Right.
They're the only apologies that I've received, Peter.
Thank you very much. Are there any declarations of interest to be put forward, announced? Then I take it there's none. So I think we have the minutes before us of the committee meeting, which was held way back on the 12th of February, before, of course, the first lockdown. And is everybody agreed, subject to, I think, some amendments that Alistair has already indicated, that these are an accurate record of what the meeting transacted?
Great.
Right. So that being the case, are there any matters which are not already covered on the agenda which members wish to raise?
No.
Then I'm going to raise a couple. It was said at the last meeting, in view of the discussion which we had about service complaints, that we would be asking Wendy Griffiths of the Customer Services and Business Support Department to join us at our next meeting. Obviously, in the present circumstances, that is not possible. I believe there has been some discussion taking place in the Overview and Scrutiny Committee to review how customer complaints are being dealt with. But I suspect at the moment there's nothing to report on that, unless someone else knows better.
We took a report to full council on Tuesday, Peter, which I can circulate to all the Standards Committee. The various recommendations made, and we hope that there will be real improvement. That's the aim in how we respond to issues raised by members of the public, and we'll be tracking it as an overview and scrutiny process in the coming weeks and months. So it isn't the end, it's just the start of the process. So we've got a report, got recommendations, and now we've got to drive through the improvements.
And if I can add to that, there's got to be a member protocol that I think Carl is bringing back in January, which will stipulate the turnaround time for complaints.
Yeah, we're going to set up a little working group of about 5 or 6 councillors that will put together with officers the protocol, and so that everyone knows what's expected when they get an issue raised by a councillor.
Thank you.
It seems to me that this is probably something better left at the moment to overview and scrutiny, and that we need not actually pursue this matter, at least for the time being. Is that the view around the committee?
Agreed.
Yeah.
Agreed.
Right. In the last minutes, reference was made to a model code of practice, which at the moment the Committee on Standards and Public Life are looking at in view of representations made by local authorities. It's anticipated that their response to the representations that have been made are likely to be forthcoming fairly shortly with a draft code. So it's quite possible when next we meet, we'll be able to consider the model code and have a final version compared with what we are doing. I don't have anything else to report at the moment, just other than to actually say, in terms of the last minutes, except to say that we also spent some time at carrying forward the training of members on standards. And at the moment, obviously, with the lockdowns that we've been experiencing, it just isn't possible at the moment to advance that training. But I hope that the time when these lockdowns have finally finished, that we'll be able to advance that, because it is important that the training of members of the council is dealt with. That concludes, I think, the minutes of the last meeting, and I think, Robert, it's over to you in terms of the update on complaints.
Yes, before I do, Peter, I believe Suzanne Dodd has joined the meeting. I'd just like to welcome Suzanne Dodd. She's our new city solicitor and monitoring officer, and therefore will, obviously, in her role as the monitoring officer, has sort of overview and of all standard related matters. So welcome, Suzanne. I think she's here, but if not, it's good to introduce her anyway to the committee before I move on to the next agenda item. Can
I just endorse that? A very warm welcome to Suzanne. And I hope that perhaps it will be possible for us to meet fairly shortly. I know she was hoping to meet me sometime shortly after her appointment, but at the moment, clearly, unless we do a Teams meeting, I don't think that's possible.
Okay.
Robert?
Okay. Yep. Yes, you'll have to forgive me if I keep looking to the side, because I've got my notes on my separate on my iPad, so I can just quickly run through all the various cases we've had since April this year. What I was going to sort of very quickly just give a one line in terms of the nature of the complaint, and one line in terms of how we've dealt with it, and then when we go into a future agenda item, the next agenda item, that will play into some of the comments I'm going to make here. So a complaint in total we have had since April 15 complaints, which I'll quickly go through. Firstly, one is that a councillor provided incorrect information on council policy. That was initially looked at. It referred to more of a service delivery stroke departmental issue, because they were providing all the details. It wasn't determined that it's a matter for standards. It wasn't really matter, but that's gone now through other council complaints processes. Complaint number 2 was a councillor made a referral to another agency about child safety. Again, there was considered to be no breach on that, because that was simply a councillor fulfilling their sort of corporate parenting responsibilities with the potential safety of a child at risk. So that was fine. Then we've had another complaint, and it was an open complaint that was resubmitted. There's no new evidence for us to consider, and it was not for us, and as such, it wasn't deemed a valid complaint. It also involved allegations of a criminal nature or criminal offences committed by a councillor, which we don't think is a matter for, well, it isn't a matter for standards committee. That is a matter for the appropriate other enforcement agencies, namely the police. There was then another complaint, again about an old matter that had previously been determined. Again, there was no evidence, and in effect, it was almost like trying to an appeal, which again is not permissible under our sort of code, or indeed anyone others' codes. The next one is that a councillor then wrongly completed their declaration or register of interests and failed to disclose information. There was no evidence to support that, and actually, when we looked at it, it's about disclosure for home address, and the MO had actually given a dispensation for that councillor not to make public their home address because of safety concerns. Then next one, councillor held a local meeting. It was held online and organised by the councillors themselves. It had no sort of BCC support, but the councillor then refused a constituent, or then the complainant, access to that meeting. There was history between the councillor and the individual, and the councillor felt that it was proportionate and appropriate course of action not to admit them, and that's a matter for how a councillor, in my view, was dealing with their sort of casework and how they interact with their constituents, which again, it's not really for either the monitoring officer or standards committee to sort of make judgments on that. If there are issues around that type of area, I think that's more probably appropriate for the groups to deal with. Then there was a complaint about 2 councillors in the same ward that they were not doing their ward work. We treated that as a single complaint. Sorry. Again, it's about performance of the councillor. That's not something I would take to standards, but what we do with those is make referrals to the groups about their performance and their visibility within the ward. There was then a breach about an alleged breach of the COVID guidance by a councillor. The councillor confirmed that he was not acting as a councillor, he was acting in another role, but nevertheless apologised. No further action was taken. We've then got a number of other cases which we've still got under consideration, so I'll just quickly go through those. There are 2 involving where a member has complained about another member and their conduct, which again we've involved the groups on that, and the groups are working with us. There's a breach of COVID COVID guidance. There's 2 complaints, and we are just doing our initial determination on those. There is then a councillor complaint about their use of social media. There is one about a further one. There's 2 now. One came in this morning about a councillor's performance and what they're doing in the wards and what their work they're doing, how they're communicating with their constituents. And then we have another complaint about a councillor's behaviour, which is, I say, is under consideration, and one other general breach of the code. I see Steve's got his hands up. If I sort of just finish, I've very nearly finished, then I'll come back to any questions at the end, if that's okay. Of the 8 cases that we have determined, 2 were sort of resubmitted old cases, which we've not deemed not valid. One was in terms of service delivery, one which involved the 2 members related to performance, one was the failure to disclose interest, one was in breach of COVID guidance, and there were 2 what I call 2 other general breaches of the code. If I take questions, and I can just quickly at the very end go through sort of what I call the highlight elements in terms of the issues that I think that are coming up through the cases that we've received so far to date. So if I take the question from Steve first.
Thanks. Apologies, Robert, that I think my camera's not working, so I hope you can hear me.
I can see you as well.
Can you? Oh dear.
Yes, can see you.
Just for future reference, would it be more helpful for members? It would for me, if we got a short written summary rather than just a verbal update that we can perhaps look at in advance and then give you considered questions on the day.
Yes, because normally that's what I try and do, but I say unfortunately I wasn't able to do it for this particular meeting. But what I will do is circulate that after the meeting. It's just putting it all together, and I'll make sure it goes in the minutes as well. But after this meeting, I'll just tidy that up and circulate it.
Great, thank you.
I got a question from Alistair.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it was just on the complaint mentioned around a property address not being identified on a declaration of interest. It almost seems that it was probably a bit of a faff for everyone involved, in the need for that complaint to be raised if there was a dispensation. So is it not routine that if there is a dispensation on record, that's mentioned on the register of interest?
It is. I mean, perhaps I'll come back to this later in the agenda if I can.
Yeah. Okay.
There's no other sort of comments. I mean, so what? A couple of things I think are sort of coming out to me are of the sort of 16 cases in total, a number were made by the same complainant or by what I call a connected household. There's still quite a lot of misunderstanding which we try to address before, and what standards can and cannot consider. It's definitely not appropriate for standards committee to be considering matters that involve criminal matters of a criminal nature, and that's not what standards should be doing. What is also sort of causing some confusion at the moment is what is people's understanding between acting in an official and in a personal capacity. Under the code of conduct, and I think under the proposed new code of conduct as well, is that we can only deal with matters where a councillor is acting in an official capacity, and rightly so. What is working well is the working relationships that's now been established between the sort of monitoring officer's office and the groups. I also have the ability to speak to the group leaders if appropriate. We've also got links in with the group whips and the group secretaries. So again, that's something we will continue to develop. Councillor Tilsley.
I think it would be fair to say, Robert, having listened to the list of complaints that you've had, that at least three of them are from the same person and are what I would term to be frequent flyers and frankly vexatious complaints.
Yep, thank you for that. I will take that one away.
Any other questions?
As I say, I will look to circulate that post-meeting, and I will certainly just take on board Steve's comment. That will go out in future meetings before. It was just for today that I wasn't able to get that out with the paper, so my apologies to the committee on that.
Thank you, Rob. I think we next move on to the update on on the development of lay members.
This one of the things that our sort of constitution of our committee is slightly different to most other local authorities in that we have a lot of lay members on the committee. So it's how we then start to sort of tap into that expertise and also to develop them so they actually can understand better sort of the workings of the complaint system, particularly the code of conduct. And whilst we're under no sort of obligation at the moment to consult with either the independent person or anyone on standards where we deem a complaint sort of invalid, it is one of the recommendations, I believe, on sort of the new code that we actually do that. So what we'd like to do, or at least trial it and see, then review how it goes, is that we appoint a lay person to help that we can go to and say, look, we consider, at least in the first instance, this is not to be deemed to be a valid complaint for X, Y, Z. The benefit to me and sort of the monitoring officer as well is that it also provides that degree of openness and transparency. The alternative is that we sort of share them with the independent person, but we don't want to overwhelm the independent person as such because they are two very distinct roles. So really the purpose of that paper is just to get some initial thoughts and just to start that debate, really. And so I'd appreciate any comments. And I say one of the things we were sort of going to do that is within have like a rota system, but we're not going. That's going to be very flexible. And we're not going to be bound by it in any shape or form. But again, it's just really getting some initial thoughts from the committee.
This harks back to the review which was carried out by the Committee on Standards in Public Life last year. It was nearly 2 years ago now. And basically they were wanting to see a greater involvement of independent people. I'm not using the term independent person deliberately, in the ethics of local government. And of course we have maintained throughout, since the statutory scheme finished, we've maintained the status quo, in the sense that in the statutory scheme there were 6 members of the committee who were councillors and 6 lay members. There was parity. And we've maintained that, as I say, and it seems to, I think, me and Steve Jonas and I have had some discussion with Robert about this, that it is a way of actually achieving much greater involvement than that perhaps suggested by the committee, that is the Committee of Standards and Public Life, much greater involvement of lay people in the workings of the committee. This is stage one we're considering, of course, where there is a complaint which I'll avoid the word investigated, but is looked into by the monitoring officer or her deputy. And either as a result of that inquiry, then there is no further action which is required. It doesn't comply with the requirements of the complaints procedure, or where there is perhaps a complaint which has some validity, then the layperson can be invited to comment on the monitoring officer's recommendations. If the matter is to be dismissed at that particular stage, then that's it. Otherwise, it goes forward, of course, to stage two with an investigation. At that point, the independent person gets involved, and that is where he will not only be consulted by the investigator in relation to any recommendations he makes, but will also be available to the counsellor against whom the complaint has been made in order to discuss matters with him. So it's quite a distinct role for the independent person on our scheme, but it does seem to me that it is advisable to make the best possible use of our independent lay persons on the committee at stage one.
Got a hands up from Councillor Alden.
Thank you. Can you just give me a bit of clarification? So if the complaint comes in and a monitoring officer wants to discuss it, are they just going to discuss it with one lay member, different one each time on rotation, or with the chairman and that lay member?
I would say, and again, this is perhaps for Peter as well, is that it can go to a lay member, but I think Peter as chair, or Stephen, and potentially Ray as well, may need to have some sort of oversight on that. So just so they get a feel for what is coming in, rather than just be one member.
Yes, I thought it probably did mean that. And when I read it through, I was sort of slightly worried about that, because it means the complaint comes in, goes to the monitoring officer, they discuss it with the chairman, who is a lay person, and another lay person. The councillors look like they're being sidelined here, which is what slightly concerned me about it.
I mean, there is also a process within the in the written process that we share it with the group through the chief, through the group whip. But perhaps we can sort of just have a look at that then, if you feel that members of the elected members on standards are being sort of excluded, if that's your concern.
Well, yes, I wonder what the other members thought. That was what, when I read it through, that's the first thing that I thought, what do the other councillors think?
Yeah. Steve's got his hand up.
Perhaps I ought to wait, Robert, until the councillors have spoken first, if there are any other comments from them.
No other councillors got their hands up at the moment, Steve, so if you want to carry on.
Okay. I wasn't going to make a comment on that last one, but I will in a second. In terms of the scheme as it stands, or the proposal that it stands, perhaps you can accuse me of having a conflict of interest, but I would support it and would be very comfortable with having a role as a layperson, trying to use, and I'm sure colleagues would as well, use what skills and experience I've got in assisting the monitoring officer. In response to the question about elected members, I can see the point of concern about elected members appearing to be excluded, and I can understand that. But at this point, this is about an investigation going ahead or not, and would be certainly seem to be more transparent and independent. And at the end of the day, the investigations or not as you've just done earlier, Robert, are reported back to members, and any final decisions should be reported back to members, so they will play an appropriate part at that particular time. But I'm taking the point that's just been made as having an earlier, not so much involvement, but information about complaints, not making a decision at this point. So that's a fine balance, I think.
Stephen Jones has got his hand up as well now.
Yeah, I was only just going to say, this is, again, for those of us that have been on this committee for a very long time, we remember when all these were all of them came through the committee, and we, it must be said, wasted a huge amount of everybody's time dealing with and sometimes discussing complaints that were always completely pointless and didn't breach any of the guidelines at all. So the way I see this proposal is a filtering, is an independent filtering. I'll rephrase that, an independent filtering out of pointless complaints, which there will be a general report on in the way that Rob did earlier this afternoon. If there is anything going forward, any further investigation, then I would expect that to come back as an individual item to the committee. I have absolutely no objection at all to all councillor committee members being involved in the entire process from beginning to end. But I suspect that their workloads are such that actually this sort of independent filtering out is probably as much to their benefit as anybody else's. Thank you.
Councillor Tilsley and then Councillor Rice.
Thank you. I think I have no objections to the proposal, purely from the point of view that it is a filter, a triage of complaints to assess the validity of those complaints. And as I said previously, and I probably will say in the private agenda as well, there are a number of vexatious complaints that are made against members, and we really shouldn't be wasting our time until there is sometimes some substantive accusations or allegations that are made. It is better that members don't get involved.
Councillor Rice?
Yeah, I tend to agree with Paul that in order to protect ourselves, I think it's probably best if that initial filtering is done by the lay members. I was going to raise it when Peter, Chair, asked about if we had any other business. I am concerned about repeated vexatious, spurious complaints against councillors, and the one that I don't want to mention it in public agenda. I was going to wait to the private. The one that Robert's emailed us about recently, where a member of staff was also implicated, and I understand that member of staff has subsequently gone off sick as a result of the allegation. I think we have a duty of care to protect particularly members of staff who are implicated in any of these vexatious complaints. But also, I know we've probably had this discussion in the past about how we stop them, but I think that it's outrageous the way that some complaints are repeated and get worse and worse as time goes on, and it's as if that because we don't nip it in the bud, they get worse and worse and worse. And I do think perhaps earlier intervention could protect people involved.
Thank you. Councillor Johnson was next.
Thank you. I just wanted to agree with my colleagues. I don't have any objection about the proposal and the lay trustees filtering. My only common concern is that all the lay trustees are all male. I raised this, I think, before when we recruited lay trustees, that the recruitment had been a success for all male applicants, I think, and we were looking into a female applicant. I just, as a committee, I think we ought to try and do more to make sure that we've got an equal outlook out there for everyone, that we are balanced. So whilst I don't have an objection, it's just something I wanted to bring to the attention, that it's all male.
Comment.
And I will come back to that at the end if I can. Then there was Ray.
You're muted, Ray. You're still muted, Ray.
Okay, shall I take Stephen next?
Apologies. Apologies. Thank you, Councillor Tilsley. I just wanted to make a point, Rob, in terms of the legal situation. Am I correct that nothing in this proposal is against the legislative requirement that decisions should be taken when there is consultation required on complaints of the monitoring officer consulting with the independent person? My anxiety would be that if there was ever a situation that you'd consulted a lay person in accordance with the voluntary code, but had not consulted the independent person, and you went forward to some sort of investigation and hearing, then that could actually be construed as going against the requirements of the legislation. Could you give me some assurance, Robert?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, this is more about where we are initially, anyway, but where we're ruling complaints sort of not to be valid before it even goes any further than that. So, and currently that can be done by the monitoring officer. And so where we are sort of at the very, very outset saying this is not a valid complaint, for example, then we just have that added assurance as the MO. But it wouldn't affect the situation where if a complaint is going to go forward, that it would in any shape or form affect the role, the statutory role of the independent person.
Thank you.
Stephen Jonas?
Oh, sorry, I've not closed it. Sorry, I thought my hand had come down. My fault. I've taken it off now.
To reassure Councillor Rice that this is the point he has raised is something which is of very, very great concern, where there are people who are making repeated complaints. Clearly, I would suggest vexatious, and it makes life for councillors, and unfortunately where sometimes for officers of the council, makes life very, very difficult for them to carry out their duties. And this is something that I would like to see our committee giving a great deal of consideration to.
Councillor,
sorry.
Yeah, on that particular issue, unfortunately I'm a recipient of the frequent flyer stroke vexatious complaints, and I think that I know of at least one other member of the Standards Committee who is, and I think that we need to take a decision as to how we deal with these in future, and probably it is better that we discuss this in the private part of the agenda.
That's why I didn't raise it before.
Yeah. Thank you. Just two quickly points. I just welcome Councillor Fowler, who's joined us. And then just going back to Councillor Johnson's point earlier about representation. That is something that we are acutely aware of, and we are looking to address that. Perhaps if I can come back to that later on, once we've got some firm proposals, how we can address that balance. Because you mentioned that previously, the recruitment process, and it is something I have been discussing elsewhere as well.
Very properly, yeah. Then shall we move on now to the next agenda item? There are a couple of matters that I will be asking Rob to bring to the agenda in the next few meetings. One is a review of the gifts register, which I think we will need to be looking at, and the other is in relation to declaration of interests. As you know, every year the declaration of interest is reviewed, and I would suggest after that review is carried out, then we should receive a formal report from the monitoring officer or Robert as to the position with that register, and just at least be reassured that all is in order. Those are the only two matters that I will be wanting, additional matters that I should be wanting to bring to the meeting in future. Pardon me.
Sorry. Sorry, Peter, can I just going back to the last agenda item, Councillor Rice mentioned that the member staff is off ill because of this. She's not, and she's helping.
I implied that then, sorry.
Sorry, yeah, I just wanted to correct that for the record. Thank you.
Thank you. Right, is there any other urgent business to bring to the committee? Then if I may have authority to act.
Agreed.
Then that concludes the this part of the meeting, and I thank you all for your participation.